you can have the most amazingly run project with a brilliant project plan, and if you don't communicate well to your stakeholders, you might not have as a successful project as you could have. You can have a fairly averagely run project, but you communicate amazingly to all your stakeholders and they're really engaged and informed, and you can have the most successful outcome. So communication in project management is absolutely the most important thing. What you want to do, and sometimes it's helpful at the beginning of the project, have a bit of a framework to consider all of your stakeholder groups. There'll be certain stakeholders who are really obvious and you'll remember them and you'll address them. But there'll be other groups who you'll probably only notice when they start to care, and by then it might be a little bit too late. So you want to be thinking about them up front. So we've got a bit of a framework that's going to help you think about which stakeholders are in which groups and what sorts of things you should be doing to engage them. So to help you to sort of segment your stakeholders and think about what information they need when, I want you to think about the groups in terms of their level of power or influence on the project, and also the level of impact that this project has on their lives. There will be a group of stakeholders, probably in the wider audience, who have a low level of power and authority over your project, and they're probably not going to be that impacted by the project. You don't need to do too much with them, but it is a mistake to forget that they're there. So remember they're there, they're in what we call the monitor group, and literally do that. Monitor how they're going. If you do have some places for information where they can sort of self-serve, if they're interested, it's there. And if something does change in the project that's going to impact them, then you know that you have to sort of adjust your sort of communication criteria to suit their needs at that time. But other than that, you don't have to do too much with this group, and they'll probably get annoyed if you do try to communicate with them too much. Often the greatest volume of stakeholders are what I would call the inform group. So they are a low level of power or influence on the project, but a very high impact from the results of the project. Think about end users of a system implementation, or the wider staff body, or maybe the student cohort that's affected. For that stakeholder group, it's often easy to forget them because they're not that influential. However, at the end of the project, if they're really happy and they're singing your praises, then that's what people are going to remember. And so they can often have a big impact on the success of your project. For those people, they're also likely to feel the most anxious throughout the project, because you've got to remember they're going to be impacted by it. They're hearing things, but they're not that involved. But they don't actually have much power to do anything about it. So you can satisfy some of their requirements by just regular, frequent information. So they know where things are up to. If there's going to be training or something, they're told about that. They feel confident that they're being looked after and considered. You might have a website where they can go to view information. They don't have a lot of power, so give them some power to at least know what's going on. You've all got a group of stakeholders who have high level of power of influence, but a fairly low level of impact. And we call this group the satisfy group. Now, you might not feel like they're heavily involved in your project, and they probably don't want to be heavily involved in your project. But if something happens that all of a sudden, steps into their world or impacts them, all of a sudden they're going to care and you're going to hear about it. So it's always better to think about this group early on and give them some level of information. They will not need a lot of information regularly because, it will be too much for them. They don't need it. So you need to think about what level they need when and how you can provide that. They might be on a steering group, or you might have a occasional forum for staff, or an overall update or something like that. You want to keep an eye on them, and you want to get a little bit of a sense of how they're feeling. So if you're not satisfying the information that they need, you can adjust to that a little bit before it becomes a problem. If you've got a group of stakeholders who have a high level of power or influence on your project, and they're also likely, or their teams are likely to be highly impacted by the project, then they are in your engage group. You need to be engaging them regularly in this project. Frequent information, two-way dialogue. You need to feel that they're satisfied as the project's progressing.